The audience in the studio had a great time watching this round play out. Family Feud contestants often face questions that put them in awkward situations. But some questions can turn out to be downright controversial. But at times, the way people respond to these can be hilarious. That is exactly what contestants recently did, and Steve Harvey had a hard time dealing with. The host asked the question, "Name something you do both while working out and also making love." A man named Benjamin got to his buzzer first and answered, "Listening to music." That was the number 6 answer on the board. A woman named Morgan was next, and she said, "Singing." Harvey loved that answer and even gave the contestant's husband a fit bump. However, it was not one of the correct answers on the board. As a result, the Holmes family decided to play further. A woman named Chantel was next, and she answered, "Moan." That was the number 3 answer up there on the board. Tarm was the next contestant, and he answered, "Steve, sweat." That was the number 1 answer up there. Next up was a woman named Brittany, who answered, "Remove clothing." That was also a correct answer, and the Holmes family was looking at a fantastic start to the game. Up next was a man named Dexter, whom Harvey called Mr. Suave. After hearing the question, he answered, "Steve, I burn calories." The host loved the answer. "That boy smooth, ain't he?" he quipped. Unfortunately, the answer was not up there on the board, which might have surprised some people in the studio on the day. Benjamin's turn came around again, and he said, "I'm not saying I do." That is when Harvey cut him off and shared his 2 cents. "You're not gonna pull this answer out of nowhere," he said. "See, y'all kill me with this right here." The contestant then finally got a chance to answer the question, and he said, "Watch TV." Everyone laughed at this, including the host. However, it was not one of the correct answers. Chantel was next, and she said, "Steve, I push myself." Harvey raised his eyebrows at this answer, but the contestant cleared up that she was a motivator in such situations, which was also hilarious. The answer, however, was not correct, and that was the Holmes family's 3rd strike. The Lovelace family now had a chance to steal the game. The contestant, Morgan Stepped answered, "We're gonna say you breathe heavily, Steve." That was one of the correct answers, and the family won the round. There are moments on Family Feud that become instantly unforgettable, those chaotic, outrageous, slightly unhinged moments that make Steve Harvey stare into the camera as if questioning every decision that led him to that exact spot on the stage. And then there are moments so wild that even he can't keep his cool. This episode? It delivered the latter. It was supposed to be a normal taping, 2 cheerful families, 6 simple rounds, and Steve Harvey ready to sling jokes in a sharp suit so clean it could blind someone. But no one, not even the notoriously quick-witted host, was prepared for the string of bizarre, jaw-dropping answers that would send him into full meltdown mode. The madness begins. Name something you might bring to a picnic. The first question seemed ordinary enough. Steve read it with his usual swagger, scanning the players as if daring someone to say something foolish. The Johnson family buzzed in immediately, but instead of giving a normal answer, food, drinks, a blanket, the contestant proudly shouted, "A refrigerator." The room fell silent. Steve blinked 3 times, walked in a slow circle, and came back only to ask, "You mean to tell me you are dragging a whole refrigerator to the park?" The contestant nodded with absolute seriousness. Steve dropped his cue cards, stepped away from the podium, and dissolved into laughter so loud the producers had to pause the taping. The audience, of course, completely lost it. Steve's face turned red, tears welled at the corners of his eyes, and he leaned against the podium as if it was the only thing keeping him upright. That was only round 1. Round 2, name something people do when they're bored. This time it was the Ramirez family. Steve looked hopeful, maybe they would restore a little sanity. Nope. The buzzer sounded, and the contestant announced, "Start a fight with the neighborhood rooster." The audience screamed. Steve froze like someone hit the pause button. Then he burst out laughing, head back, hands on hips, full body shake. He walked to the edge of the stage, bent over, and literally begged the contestant, "Why? Why? Is that the first thing you do when you're bored?" The contestant simply shrugged. "He starts it sometimes." Steve walked away again, this time all the way backstage, while the audience watched him disappear behind the curtain still laughing. The camera cut to the rooster-fighting contestant, who stood there completely unfazed. Producers eventually wrangled Steve back, but he was already slipping into what fans lovingly call Harvey meltdown mode, the stage where he's laughing, questioning his sanity, and roasting the contestants all at once. Round 3, name something you wouldn't want your doctor to say during surgery. At this point, Steve was bracing himself. He held the card like a shield. The first player hit the buzzer and blurted, "Oops. Wrong leg." Steve's mouth fell open. The audience gasped, then burst into laughter. But the second contestant somehow topped that by saying, "Is anyone here good with glue?" Steve dropped to his knees. Literally on the ground. Face down. Laughing so hard that a stagehand had to hand him a tissue. He got up, still shaking, and yelled, "You need glue? My brother, what kind of operation is this?" Even he couldn't hold the show together. His composure was gone. He walked in circles, pointed at random audience members, and declared that the whole show had gone off the rails. Fast money breakdown, name something you do quietly. Anyone who's watched Family Feud knows that Fast Money can deliver some of the weirdest answers of all time. But this one might go down in the Hall of Fame. Contestant number 1 took a deep breath, and Steve, by now suspicious of everyone, narrowed his eyes. Name something you do quietly. The contestant smirked and whispered, "Crime." Steve slid down the podium dramatically, like a man whose will to remain upright had finally abandoned him. The audience shrieked. The contestant stood still, nodding proudly as if he had delivered the most brilliant answer in Feud history. When Steve finally got back on his feet, he couldn't even speak at first. He wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and said, "You," whispering to me like that made it 10 times worse. But things weren't done spiraling. Contestant number 2, completely unaware of contestant number 1's answer, stepped up. Steve warned him. Please. Please. For my sanity. Just be normal." The question repeated. The buzzer sounded. The contestant responded. "Break into your neighbor's house." Steve screamed. Not yelled. Screamed. He threw his hands in the air and walked off the stage again, yelling, "Am I hosting Family Feud or True Crime USA?" The audience roared. People were crying from laughter. Steve, barely able to breathe, had to sit on a stool and wait for a break. Steve's final meltdown, name a reason a person might run out of a house. By the final round, the contestants were chaos incarnate. Steve read the question with caution. The first contestant said, "Because all the snacks are gone." Steve tilted his head like a confused puppy. But the second contestant. Oh, the second contestant. They proudly answered. Because their wig flew off. Steve dropped the card again. He paced. He laughed. He doubled over. He pointed at the contestant's wig to check if it was secured. Then, in classic Steve Harvey fashion, he launched into an impromptu stand-up routine about wigs escaping people's heads like they had somewhere better to be. It brought the house down. A legendary episode fans will never forget. By the time the final points were tallied, it didn't even matter who won. The families were laughing. The audience was breathless. The camera crew was struggling to keep the shot steady. And Steve Harvey? He had experienced a full emotional roller coaster: shock, horror, disbelief, uncontrollable laughter, resignation. After the final buzzer, he looked directly into the camera and said, "This is the wildest show I've ever done. I don't know how you all do this to me every week. I'm too old for this mess." Fans online immediately crowned it a top-tier Family Feud episode, with clips spreading across social media like wildfire. People praised Steve for once again proving why he's one of the most entertaining hosts on television. His reactions were genuine. His laughter was contagious. His meltdown? Iconic. And as always, Family Feud delivered pure, chaotic joy.